In the midst of the pandemic, Humanity Rising has been broadcasting and enabling people from all over the world to come together to share their experiences and their concerns and their aspirations for the human future. Our hearts go out today to the people in India. India in the last 24 hours crossed 20 million cases, with over 400,000 cases just in the last 24 hours. The death rates are spiraling literally out of control. The health infrastructure in the massive megalopolis of Mumbai, some 20 million people, has collapsed. And many of us have been watching on the news and seeing the images of the burning ghats and the people without oxygen in the streets. And so as we start our session today, we just want to express our solidarity and our concern and our compassion for the people in South Asia, as we all, at different times with different levels of severity, have been traversing this extraordinary event in human history, where a little tiny, almost invisible virus has brought the modern world to its knees and shows a remarkable intelligence and adaptivity and persistence as we now move into nearly 15 months since the pandemic began last January out of Wuhan, China. Let us just pause for a moment as we take all this in and center ourselves in our bodies. Let us take a few deep breaths. Let us close our eyes and place our attention on our hearts. Just for a minute, let us listen to our heartbeats in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that we're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. And now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you joining our session today, I want to commence our program with just a reflection that one of the most fundamental themes for Humanity Rising and for the world that has emanated out and through the pandemic is the issue of race. It's an extraordinary thing that a pandemic challenging us in terms of public health, and I would say biological and physical safety, has also been the occasion through the iconic killing of George Floyd on the 25th of May of last year that somehow brought to the surface a cauldron of long pent-up energies around race and around difference and around subordination of difference. And so as Humanity Rising has traversed its own pathway for the past year, we've taken up issues having to do with the diversity of the human species and how we understand the diversity in a more respectful and compassionate way. This has been intertwined on this instance today with an initiative that has come out of the proceedings in a partnership with Riane Goodman, who's a management consultant and a therapist and someone who's spent a lot of time over decades now in the men's movement in trying to really look at on a monthly basis. This is the second session that Riane has convened of what masculinity looks like in a post-patriarchal world. There's been a lot of attention on women's liberation and the empowerment of women all over the world, and very, very rightly so. They've been under the boot of patriarchy for millennia. But as women have been liberated, men are going through their own process of reimagination and redefinition. And so we've been building a conversation around that in Humanity Rising that will culminate in November, beginning on November 19th, which is International Men's Day, in a global summit on men's issues that Riane and colleagues from around the world are building in partnership with Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising. So Riane, I want to welcome you back to Humanity Rising, and I turn the program over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Jim. It's so good to be here, and I feel so honored to be able to be a convener of these panels. And as we move toward November 19th and the Global Men's Summit, we want to bring in as many different perspectives on manhood, being a man, masculinity as possible. And in the summit, we're also going to have, with this complex topic, as global a perspective as we can get, not only with men around the world, but also women and marginalized people. So we're really interested in looking at this topic from all directions at once, because from my point of view, that's the only way we can really understand anything. A single point of view gives us a single opinion, a single belief. But when we see things multidimensionally, we get more understanding and a better feel for the issues at hand. In the last panel, we discussed the new man of wisdom and heart, a description of how men can act virtuously within their family and within their workplace and society to meet these current challenges that we're all facing. And in this series of panels, we're discussing the impacts of hierarchy and patriarchy and the domination model that's been a feature of Western societies and cultures around the world for thousands of years. I pointed out in the first session, and I want to highlight again, that when we talk about patriarchy, we're not talking about men over women or the masculine over the feminine, but a few men, usually men, at the top ruling over and controlling most men and most women. And both men and women have been subjugated and used by those at the top of the domination culture, which values material and matter and control and power over people, relationships, care, and balance, and health. So this new vision of man and masculinity is being born within what Riane Eisler calls a partnership culture. We're moving from power over to power with, and the empowerment of others as well as ourselves. And in this series, we're highlighting initiatives and points of view that are transforming that vision of what a man is and who he can be and the roles he can play in order to be and create a healthy, whole society and culture and world. Now, Western societies traditionally reinforced competition and separation between men, that because when you get men to compete, you can control them more easily. And we're exploring topics that help to reverse that trend and bring men together through cooperation and collaboration and learning and mutual support. I've been part of the men's movement for 40 years, meeting with other men, while women have been meeting with other women to empower ourselves, to wake ourselves up, to become better people and contribute better to society. And as Jim was talking about, in the current state of politics and policing and racism, especially here in the United States, and the murders of Black men and women and the Derek Chauvin trial and conviction, it's really important to get the perspective of men who are Black to understand more deeply their experience, because they represent about 18.5% of the men in the United States. In researching the topic, because I'm white and I am not Black, I read a quote from James Baldwin, who was asked in 1961 about being Black in America. And he said this: "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. And part of the rage is this: it isn't only what's happening to you, it's what's happening all around you and all of the time, in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference and ignorance on the part of most white people in this country. It's a great temptation to simplify the issues under the illusion that if you simplify them enough, people will recognize them. I think this illusion is a very dangerous thing because, in fact, it isn't the way it works. A complex thing can't be made simple. You simply have to try to deal with it in all its complexity and hope to get that complexity across." And there was a recent article in the Washington Post written by Jonathan Capehart titled "Being Black in America is Exhausting." And it sets up our conversation for today. I'll then introduce my co-host, Michael Taylor, and we'll introduce the panelists. So this is an excerpt from this column, which you can find on the Washington Post website. "Everyone I know is just so tired," tweeted Jenna Wortham of the New York Times Magazine. "While the Black writer doesn't specify who everyone is, it's a good bet that they're also Black." And Wortham's use of tired is an understatement. Tired doesn't just refer to the trauma of the Derek Chauvin trial or seeing replays of the video of the killing of George Floyd or seeing Dante Wright being shot by a police officer after being pulled over because of an air freshener dangling from his rearview mirror. No, tired is all of that, plus whatever personal trauma we carry with us. There is no one way to be Black in America, but there is one way we live while Black in America. No matter our gender or age or socioeconomic status, we're viewed as threats. As a result, we live under siege. We do a good job of hiding the stress of it all. But know this: every Black person you know goes through some form of mental calculus before they start their day. The one comfort I take in this harrowing time is that fewer white people will write off what I've written as petty or paranoid. They've seen the videos. They've heard the wails of distraught families and angry communities, and they're starting to understand the contours of our pain. We're just so tired of the status quo. We just want to be able to live in peace. That's the end of the quote. Now, I'm a liberal, progressive, and partially enlightened white man. I've strived to be colorblind since I was a teenager in the 60s, and I've been partially or mostly successful. But because I've never experienced being Black, I've asked my friend and colleague, Michael Taylor, to join me as a panelist and a co-facilitator of this conversation. Michael's a public speaker, the author of 9 books, including Shattering Black Male Stereotypes, The Cure for Onlyness, A Black Man's Guide to Joy, Passion, and Purpose, and Black Men Rock, 10 Keys to Empower Black Men to Lead Extraordinary Lives. He's done more than 45 interviews on his podcast, Shattering Black Male Stereotypes, and he's dedicated his life to empowering men and women to reach their full potential through transforming their lives from the inside out. He's been blissfully married for 19 years to the woman of his dreams, and he's the proud father to 3 grown children whom he's extremely proud of. Welcome to the panel, Michael. Thank you for joining me in this much-needed conversation.
Well, first of all, let me acknowledge you for this platform, for engaging in this dialogue, because it is my belief that the greatest challenge we have facing our planet today is to redefine manhood and masculinity. Because in doing so, I believe we can eradicate a large percentage of the social ills currently plaguing our world. So thanks again for having me join you in this conversation. So with that being said, let's get all of our panelists to click on, turn on your video, turn on your audio. There we go. There we go. All right, so let's meet our panelists. So let's begin with Dr. Cuff Ferguson. Cuff, introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Well, let's see. I'm Cuff Ferguson. I'm a professor at UMass Boston. I'm also serve as the Human Services Program Director there, as well as the Human Services Internship Coordinator. And outside of the university, let's see, I'm also president of the Association for Humanistic Psychology. I've been in that role for many, many years. There are many things that I can say about me. I've authored a few books and have been actively involved in lots of community activities. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Cuff. How about Ray? Ray, introduce yourself, please.
Well, hello there. This is Ray Blanchard. Dr. Ray is what they call me. I'm hailing from San Antonio, Texas. Long journey out of Mississippi. We used to say we going from the outhouse to the White House. So I grew up in Mississippi, and then I cycled through St. Louis, lived in St. Louis, right outside of Ferguson. And I was teaching at the University of Oregon for a while and cycled through Southeast Asia. And I'm now on the Transformational Leadership Council and the Association of Transformational Leaders. And I'm on the Committee for Diversity in the Association of Transformational Leaders. And this is a passion that has been with me a long time, but is rising again now. And that's why I'm on that board. And I'm just delighted to be part of this conversation. I do a lot of transformational training work around the world, but I'm just honored to be with this gaggle, so to speak, of intellectuals and passionate men. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Dr. Shelton Good, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Dr. Shelton Good, President and CEO of Icarus Consulting. We are a firm that specializes in helping organizations around the corner and across the globe become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. I also am an adjunct professor at a couple of local universities here in the Atlanta area. And I'm the author of Crisis as a Platform for Social Change, from Strawberry Mansions to Silicon Valley, which is particularly relevant to our discussion today. It's a pleasure to join my colleagues on the panel.
All righty. And I am Coach Michael Taylor, and I like to think of myself as an irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. And I'm an entrepreneur, author, motivational speaker, and radio and TV show host who has committed his life to empowering others to transform their lives from the inside out. And I'm extremely excited to be on the panel today. So I want to begin with a story. Back in 1995, I was in a restaurant and I happened to overhear a conversation between these two apparently well-educated, well-spoken, professional Black men. And they were having a conversation about the eradication of Black men from society. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most depressing conversations I'd ever heard. So I listened to their conversation for a moment, then I got up and I walked over to their table. I apologized for eavesdropping, but then I looked at the guy and I said, man, please tell me you don't believe what you just said. And the guy looks at me and he says, absolutely. And then he said this, don't you watch the news? I believe in 20 years, all Black men will either be dead or in jail. And it wasn't so much the words that he used, but it was the feeling that I got as he shared those words, because I could feel his powerlessness. I could feel the resignation he had inside of him, because he had bought into this illusion that Black men were an endangered species. So the first question I want to pose to the panel is, what is your perception of the status of Black men in America today? And we'll start with you, Shelton.
Yeah, I believe that we represent the future, the future. And I'm gonna keep my comments in my lane. But when it's talking about the United States of America, I believe we're the future. While I grew up in a poor neighborhood in Philadelphia, but am the direct beneficiary of some affirmative action on the part of Jesuits. But I believe that when you look at every endeavor of human life, we rock, as you say. Sure, everybody concentrates on the negative, but my number one concern is the denial of our contributions to the United States of America as it currently exists. And so you talk about the two guys in the story, I would differ, but I do believe there's an attempt to marginalize and minimize Black men's contribution to the United States of America as we know it today. And we are the country's best hope for it to ever achieve its aspirations.
Thank you, Shelton. Cuff, what you got, man?
Well, let's see. I think I would probably come at this in two ways. One is that when you talk about status, then you have to move to like the social, cultural context and political context and so forth. And so when I go there, where I see is, well, in terms of that particular dimension, there's a lot of oppression going on. So when I look at prisons and so forth, a lot of Black men are in prisons disproportionately. Mm-hmm. But then I look at it from the perspective of what I know in my personal life and the people that I know who have actually moved from that state of being where it's that conversation, that defeatist kind of conversation. And the Black men who have moved from that state to saying, I can really do my vision. I can really take that, and I'm only limited by whatever I carry in my mind as a limited belief. And then when I look at it from that perspective, I see the status of Black men in a very hopeful way, in a very positive way. And so for me, that's an important thing to maintain in both in my individual consciousness, as well as when I look at and talk to other Black folk. I don't talk that much about all of the stereotypical things or the down things that we all kind of know. I kind of talk about possibilities and try to see if we can move ourselves into those possibilities.
Thank you, Cuff. Okay, Ray.
Well, I concur with my fellow panelists that Black men are a possibility. We're not a fixed reality as we have been interpreted as, and as we have been allowed, and we've allowed ourselves to be indoctrinated as, and conditioned to think of ourselves as broken and downtrodden. But I think we Black men are the unexplored territory. There's a richness in our heritage. There's a richness in what we've encountered throughout our lives. We have incredible strength through the conditions that we've come through. There's a term in Japanese called wabi-sabi. It's like the beauty of brokenness. And I think we have a beauty and a strength in the brokenness that we've experienced. And I think we have a lot to bring to the party and a lot of compassion to bring to the marketplace. In a way, we could say that we're the prophets of profit. We really can bring a diversity of experience to the marketplace. And I think the whole world is richer for it. So I see us as a possibility and not limited to the beliefs and the conditions that we've been conditioned to think of ourselves and the world have thought of us. I think we have the responsibility now to educate the world about who we are as a possibility rather than as a history. We have a history, but we're not our history.
Absolutely. Well, contrary to mainstream media, I believe Black men are positioned to experience unprecedented levels of success in America today. I do not buy into the negative media generated narrative that Black men are under siege and on the verge of extinction. I'm acutely aware of the challenges facing Black men. And at the same time, I am aware that there are no segments of society that does not have Black male presence. So instead of feeling victimized by all of the mainstream negative news, I feel empowered. I feel empowered because I recognize that I belong to a group of people that epitomizes strength, perseverance, courage, and faith. And so as I think back on the people who paved the way for me to be where I am today, I'm filled with hope and optimism that our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. So now I'm going to turn it over to Riane.
Thank you, all of you. It's just brilliant to hear your comments. I'm very inspired. I specialize in understanding beliefs. And so when I look into racism as a belief structure, what I see is two primary factors of how the mind works. The brain is almost automatic in this mechanism of first othering, seeing the others as either the same, which equals safe, or other, which equals dangerous. This is really primitive brain stuff. And then also categorizing. This is another thing that the mind does automatically. We put things into categories. And so the beautiful diversity of Black men gets lumped together by the mind into a category. And suddenly you're no longer beautiful individuals who have all this great knowledge and wisdom to offer, but you're put into a box. And we box a lot of different people. We box men, we box women, we box Blacks, we box Mexicans, we put people into these stereotype boxes almost as a matter of course. And I don't know yet whether it's purely social or purely brain function, but it's or both. But it's clear that diversity opens up that boxing mechanism. It's known that when children grow up in a diverse culture, they don't do as much othering. And I've talked to one individual this past month who is Black and was raised in white neighborhoods, white schools. And he said that even sometimes he has that reaction to Black faces because he grew up mostly looking at white faces. So this is deep brain mechanisms at work. And then if we're not doing battle with them, if we're not really focused on getting rid of those tendencies and opening our minds to what we're doing, it's almost like a rut that we fall into. So my next question is, you've each grown up into being very successful men in our culture because of the strengths you built, because of the beauty you are. Would you share a blatant experience of racism that you experienced in your own life and how that experience impacted you? And let's start with Ray.
Well, great. I can remember very specifically when I was 12. I was living in St. Louis at the time, my parents, and I had been chosen to go on this trip with up and coming, entrepreneurs, being exposed to new opportunities. And we took a train to Birmingham, Alabama. And we were going to go to Florida and some of the other states, but we started in Birmingham, and I had to go to the bathroom. We got off the train, we had to go to the restroom, and I walked into this area, and it said whites only, and Negroes had to go somewhere else. And even though I had grown up in Mississippi prior to that, and I was aware of people burning crosses on people's yards. I was aware that you don't go out after dark. I was aware of reading Jet magazine on the day that Emmett Till was killed. So I had all of this in me, but I had never come face to face where Negroes had to go over here. And that stuck with me throughout my life. I understood it, but yet didn't understand it. I just knew that that was not where I wanted to be for the rest of my life. I didn't want to be defined as having to be other and go over there. And I could tell you many more, but that's one that stands out early in my life.
Thank you, Ray. Cuff, would you go next?
Okay, well, my experience actually in terms of blatant, I actually literally grew up in the segregated South with all of what that means. I lived one block, for example, from an all-white school at the time, but I couldn't go there. I had to be bused all the way across town to go to my junior high school and high school. I went through the experience of when I got on a bus, I had to go to the back of the bus and to go downtown, even if I wanted to go to the theaters, I had to go into like a side entrance to the theaters. That's where the Black folks entered. I grew up literally seeing signs of white only, colored. When I stepped outside of my Black community, that's how I grew up as a child. And so that kind of segregated experience was something that was very much a part of what I encountered. And I didn't actually literally interface in any kind of meaningful way with those who say they're white until I went to college. That was my first intensive experience with the white community. So,
and how did that impact you when that occurred? What shifted for you?
Well, to be honest with you, what happened when I went to Bowdoin College up in Maine, and literally recruiters from Bowdoin came down to my all Blacks high school and recruited me. I don't even remember applying to the college. Basically what happened, and this is the story I tell, and I don't want to go too long-winded around it, but basically what happened was that my name was called on a PA system to go to this room. I went there. This guy was from Bowdoin College talking about this college I never heard of before. And then he said, and then I looked at the brochures and I saw how much it cost to go to Bowdoin. And I literally got up and walked out. And then 2 days later, my guidance counselor called me in and said, remember this guy that was here the other day? I said, yes. He said, well, before he left, he took a look at your records. And it looks like either you or this other person is going to be graduating first in your class. And regardless, they want to offer you a full 4-year scholarship. And I said, well, but I got a scholarship to Morehouse College. That's what. Okay. Then there's this debate that started happening between my grandmother, because her mother had passed away, between my grandmother and my principal about where I should go. My grandmother, who's now taking over the mothering role, said at the time, I want my grandson to go to Morehouse. My principal said, no, he should be allowed to go to Bowdoin. And nobody asked me what I wanted to do. So next thing I knew, I was on a bus going up to this all-white college. Now, my first encounters there, however, and I don't want to be too long-winded, was being introduced to an predominantly all-white school that was all male. It was an all-male school at the time. And it was centered around fraternity life. And this fraternity called Sigma Nu wanted to recruit me. And what they said at the time was, we have a discriminatory clause in the national charter, and we want to challenge it. And I said, well, I want to get an education, but let's go for it. So we challenged it, and we won the battle. There's a lot more to that particular story because I found out who was on the other end of that. It turned out to be a senator, Senator Trent Lott, who was fighting to keep me from integrating the fraternity at the time. So that was my first introduction, to the white community, challenging a statue that was in the fraternity, and but the guys are actually in the fraternity. I really liked them.
That's great, Cup. Thank you. It's a story that I can only imagine experiencing. So I appreciate that. Shelton, would you talk about a experience of blatant racism and how it impacted you?
Yeah. So for me, it was like it was yesterday. It was September 28th, 1974. The day before my 18th birthday, I was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. A group of my friends decided that we were going to celebrate my birthday. And so we was going to go out on the town, in which we did. We went out, and we celebrated. It was me, 3 of my white friends, returning to the base about 11:30 at night. We got pulled over by the Wichita Falls police, and I was driving. 3 white passengers. They asked me for my driver's license, registration. I gave them my military ID card. They said, we want you to step out of the car. I stepped out of the car. They says, we want you to step back to the cruiser, which I did. They started running all my checks and everything. And then finally, they put handcuffs on me, put me on the ground, started asking me, why I stole this car, which it was rented. And the whole time this is going on, my 3 white friends, I could hear them protesting, but they're still in the car. No, they weren't questioned. They weren't asked anything. They weren't asked to corroborate my story. Finally, I don't know why to this day, but they finally decide to uncuff me, take me off the let me off the ground, and then told me to get my black ass back on the base, which I did with post haste, and rode back to the base in complete silence. And all of my 3 comrades were in complete silence. Nobody asked me if I was okay. Nobody asked me what happened. We got back to the base, went through the gate, we got back to the dorm. They went to their rooms. I went to my room, and it was cognitive dissonance on steroids. I went to an all-white public school with males, had to go back to a black neighborhood, was in the military, interfacing with people of all backgrounds. But on that day, I was clearly reminded that the fact that you are serving your country, the fact that you are hanging out with 3 white guys, you are still something seen as something different. And I never forgot it. And every story that my grandmother, my mother, my father, the stories, all the talks that they had all came back, which is why both of my sons, both of which are military officers, one in the Navy, one in the Air Force, I still have to talk with them every time I see them. Watch your speed, be in uniform as much as possible, cooperate. From 1974 to 2021, there's a straight line. There's a straight line. I'm a person that teaches statistics and quantitative methods. I done ran all the stepwise multiple regressions. The variable that explains it all, racism. So I don't deal with intent. I don't deal with beliefs. I deal with impact that's manifested and reinforced every day in the form of public policy. I'm here in Atlanta where there was intent. People would deny it to have voter suppression, but the impact, we gotta start dealing with impact and get people to understand the consequences of people's intent. That's my story.
Thank you. It's a shocking story for me as a white person. Michael, I'm going to hand things back to you. You take it from here.
So when I was in my 20s, I became a manager for a building supply center. And the store was located in a suburb of Houston called Pearland. When I got there, I was told there were still active KKK groups in a small town called Alvin, which was just a few miles south of where I worked. And one day there was an irate customer screaming at one of my cashiers. And when I walked up to him to see what the problem was, he said he wanted to speak with the manager. When I told him I was the manager, he said, "Boy, you aren't the manager. I want to speak with your boss." When I told him I was the boss, he said, "You can't be the boss because we don't allow niggers to run things here in Pearland." I assured him that there was no one in the store who was above me, and he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Nigger, you listen to me. You better get me your boss on the phone or let me talk to a white man." So I called the owner of the store and explained there was an angry customer that wanted to speak with him. I handed him the phone, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I cannot believe you've got this goddamn nigger here running your store. Why don't you have a white man in charge?" Well, after a few moments of silence, he handed me back the phone. The owner had told him that he was not welcome in the store ever again, and I was told to contact the police if he wouldn't leave. And as fate would have it, a police officer who was a friend of mine actually walked in the store, and I told him what happened, and he asked the man to leave. The officer happened to be white, and the man thought he would be on his side, but when the officer grabbed him by the arm to escort him out, he knew he was wrong. He then went into this tirade about how niggers were trying to take over the world and how white men should band together to keep that from happening. And so the officer ended up handcuffing him and taking him to jail. And it's amazing how that incident, all of my life I've dealt with racism and I've never had an issue with it because my grandfather instilled in me at a very early age that as long as anybody didn't touch you, didn't worry about the word. So I wasn't impacted by that. And the fact that this little guy, he was he was a 60-something-year-old guy that I could have tied in a knot if I wanted to. So I wasn't afraid of the guy. But it just adds to the frustration as a Black man who's simply trying to do his job to be confronted with something like that. And again, I feel grateful that I didn't allow it to keep me from succeeding. So that's my blatant racism story. So with that, we want to jump to the next question. And so when Philando Castile was killed in his car, for those of you who don't remember, he was the gentleman that was shot by a police officer with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's daughter in the car. Well, when he was killed, I remember watching that video, and it literally broke my heart. And I remember I couldn't get that picture out of my head. And I went in this deep, deep, sad place that I couldn't shake. And so I contacted some friends of mine and I said, man, we just need to talk. I just need to talk. So we got together, and it's part of a men's group that I've been a part of for years. And so we met in a circle, and I had to let go of that sadness because even today, just thinking about it, I can feel the sadness coming up. And so my friends and I, we sat there and I sat there and I cried and I just let all that sadness go. And it allowed me to sort of heal from that trauma and that experience. So my next question is for you, men. How do you personally deal with the trauma and the pain and the anger and the frustration that I know you experience on a regular basis?
Can I take that one?
How do you deal with it?
Yeah, can I take that one first, Mike?
Go ahead, Shelton.
Two things. Number one, my source of frustration is not my personal experience. The source of my frustration is the denial that these are realities. Despite all of the documented inequities and disparities, despite all of the videos, despite everything, there is this collective denial because no one wants to believe that we live in a society that could continue to heap on us this sort of violence. So for me, how do I deal with it? I run a company that has to help communities and companies deal with this in the work environment. Plus, I do a lot of writing. So I mentioned Crisis as a platform for social change. Which documents two things: the 114 killings between 2014 and 15 of unarmed Black men. But more importantly, in that book, I interviewed over 200 law enforcement officials. And I was criticized for doing that, for getting the other side of the story. And when you talk about Philando Castile, one of the people I interviewed was a senior law enforcement official out of Minnesota, out of Minneapolis, because I was in Wisconsin at the time. And so I deal with the frustration by cathartically just writing about it and remembering I've got 2 sons and a grandson. I'm trying to do my little piece to make things better for them and for Black men and Black young men in particular that look like them. So again, it's not about me. I'm resilient. I was armed by grandmother and parents, and I'm okay. But this next generation, with all of their social media interaction and we're diverse and we don't see color, they are completely unprepared to deal with it. And my fear and frustration is for them because they think they get it and they don't.
Thank you, Shelton. So Cuff, how do you personally deal with that inner trauma that we experience on a regular basis? What do you do?
Well, I guess there's a number of ways that I deal with it. There's a psychological thing that a realization that I came to a long, long time ago, which when experiences come up, I remind myself of. And that realization had to do with a fundamental lesson of growing up in the South. And that lesson was this: I am not the projection of others. So in my mind, I'm very clear, you know, that when people project things out onto me, that's not me. So that's their issue. And I understand that's confusion and stuff that's coming at me, but I don't have to own it. I don't even have to embrace that energy. I recognize it for what it is and whatever. I also do Shelton. I actually do a lot of writing too. It's my way of processing things through and working through some issues. And then thirdly, I think what I do is I pick my battles strategically. In other words, if I were to allow every single thing that I know happens around me to really impact me in my soul, there's no way to maintain a sense of positive orientation toward my life. So what I basically do is I pick and choose what I want to, how I want to direct my energy. And where that has taken me is that I get involved with a lot of community activist kinds of activities, and I channel the energy that way. So for example, right now we're taking on the whole question of changing the name of Faneuil Hall here in Boston, because Faneuil was a slave owner, and we want to use that as an opportunity to open up dialogue around race relations. So for me, being strategic about it also helps me to deal with the traumatic issues that surround the kind of experiences that I know that exist. And there, you know, we all have it. So
Appreciate that, Cuff. Ray, how do you deal with it?
You know, I'm really blessed, I would say, because I get to travel around and I get to work with a real diverse crowd in trainings and seminars around the globe, basically. But honestly, most of them are white or Asian. And I have fewer Black men in particular in my seminars. But I've been really fortunate. I grew up, you know, being a track athlete, and I was going to go to Tennessee State, of course, to run track. But kind of like Cuff said, my counselors had me sit in an audience with a gentleman who enrolled me to go to Washington University in St. Louis. So here I am in this basically all-white university, and I experienced a lot of prejudice, racism throughout that. But I think I did kind of what Cup was saying. Their projections are not who I am. And I had a few people take me under their wings and kind of groom me for this challenge that I was facing. How am I going to be successful in this world like that? I remember so many times being stopped in my car in Oregon because I drove a BMW and had to stand out in the rain just to let them do my checks while it rains. And I just drew upon a lot of my family heritage of strength, that this isn't about me, it's about them. I remember this one incident. I was doing a training, I think in South Carolina, and I was telling people to do some things, giving some instructions. And this one gentleman says, well, I'm not going to do it. And we worked with him a little bit, and he still refused to do it. And he finally says, I'm not going to do it unless you can let me tell you why. He says, I don't do this because you're a nigger and you don't give me instructions. And he went on and on about that. And a few minutes later, he broke down in tears and fell on his knees. And he began to apologize. that wasn't who he really was. And I don't know what really came over him. But I think it was, he needed to get that out. And after that, this man became a connection with me for years, would keep up with me for years. So I guess having so many experiences like that and opposite experiences of that, it validates to me that everybody is going through their own conditioning. Everybody's going through what they learned or were taught, but it's not who they are. And I keep my eye on that. I keep my eye on the magnificence of every human being, and that it's my purpose to be however I've got to be and do what I've got to do to allow people to their magnificence to emerge. So I've got to keep my thoughts on what's possible and who people are, rather than what all the circumstances and conversations that they've been taught. I guess that's how I deal with it on an ongoing basis, but it's tough. Like some of you are saying, that I got to calculate and prepare myself before I go out of my door in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the police? When I'm driving down the road, if a policeman is 2 blocks behind me, I'm gonna kind of pull over into the service station, or pretend I'm shopping for something, let him go by. We've got to put that on like putting on your seatbelt in the morning, you know, and get through life. So you still got to deal with that on an ongoing basis. I just want to leave you with something one of my movie producer friends was telling me. He was talking with a gentleman, and he said that I'm colorblind. I don't see color. And the Black gentleman he said that to said, and I'm quote, "Don't tell me you're colorblind, and don't tell me we're all the same inside. Because unless you can see my Blackness, my uniqueness, see all of my differences from you, then you don't see me at all." And I say we've got to see people's distinction and not pretend that everybody's the same and put our blinders on. Because when we put our blinders on, that is racism.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you, Ray.
I'm very glad you said that, actually. That whole colorblind thing, I can't help myself from saying this, because the whole issue around being colorblind, it's as if one doesn't want to acknowledge that there is in fact color. And rather than being able to celebrate, you know, the beauty of all the color that exists and being able to really embrace it, it's kind of like saying, well, yeah, I don't see you. So it's important then not to walk around saying I'm colorblind. It's saying, yeah, you are who you are. And yes, I can embrace all of who you are.
Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely.
So Lion, in the interest of brevity, you want to check in terms of questions, because we've got a lot more questions than we have time. So is there one that you'd like to pick out, Lion, so that we can start tying this up?
I have so many questions.
I know.
and I'm learning so much, and it's I just want to tell you I'm deeply touched in this, you know, the mention of colorblindness. And I even said, you know, I've always tried to be colorblind, and so I'm humbled really by this. And for me, it is seeing each individual unique beauty of each person, and to not exclude, but to include. And so my question is that, you know, we're in this panel and in this program, we're trying to create a new paradigm of masculinity one that's beyond patriarchy, which is hierarchical, right? One that's beyond bias in the sense of exclusiveness or exclusion, one that's respectful and inclusive and socially just. So my question is, what would that look like at the societal level, and what do we need to do to create it? And in particular, is the Black community engaged in this conversation, or is it just beyond, you're dealing with too much of the practical issues of Blackness to even think about it? So that's my question is, what can we do to be more inclusive, to inform and educate people who are not Black what it means to be Black? That's what we're trying to do here, so that we're not color blind, but we're color enhanced, perhaps. Maybe that's a good word. So I'm just going to open it up, and whoever would like to speak would love to hear those thoughts.
So Ray, Ryan, I want to jump on that one.
Please.
Because I think there's this, we hear throughout the media that there's a lack of Black male role models. There's never been a lack of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models. And what you seldom see in mainstream media is the fact that there are a lot of organizations, specifically Black male organizations, that are really changing the narrative and conversations about Black men in general. For example, there's 100 Black Men, which is a powerful organization that's been doing work for years. There's the Ever Forward Club that's working on redefining masculinity for Black men. There's the Black Man Can Institute, which goes around preparing young men for college. So my point is, there are a lot of us who are having this conversation and changing our inner narratives within ourselves. You just seldom see it in mainstream media. So my challenge is for the media to showcase and highlight how we're actually contributing to our own growth and development and transformation, because that's something that you seldom see. So again, that's why I'm so grateful for this platform, which gives us an opportunity as Black men to showcase and highlight the contributions that we're making.
Yeah, let me piggyback on that just for 1 second. Number one, again, thanks for the platform. Number two, no, we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. So I would encourage anyone that wants to connect with me or any of the panelists if they're open to it on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. But Michael, I'm so glad you said that, because it's not that there's been this absence of anything. Whether it's media or whoever who is only after ratings and sales, why would they tell that story? It's not the story that's going to sell. So it has been incumbent upon organizations like the 100 Black Men and others to tell our own story and create platforms like yours, Michael, like your platform. So that's why I wanted to piggyback, because let me make sure you take a bow for your platform, which allows these stories like this to get out. Alternative, it's not the media, it's going to be alternative media that's going to help get the stories out.
Hey. Yeah, let me piggyback on that. I too, Michael, want to acknowledge you for your platform, but I also want to acknowledge Jim and Lion for this platform, for us to be able to reach so many people globally at this point. One of the things that we can do, and one of the things I'm doing, I'm working with some movie producers, and we have a film that's coming out that's going to be in the Tribeca Film Festival. It's called Ferguson Rises. And it's about inspiring hope and dignity and love as the way forward. It's kicked off by the Michael Brown murder, which really put the Black Lives Matter movement on the global map. And it's about interviewing people in the community, locals, police, clergy, local people standing on the street for 400 plus days saying enough is enough. And this film was written and produced by a Black man, Mobolaji Olambawamnu. He produced this film, and we're putting it out there, and we're doing another film called Reinvented. It's about uplifting young people to create the world that we've always wanted. But it's about letting minorities, young kids who are bullied, being bullied, bullies, to realize that there's something else that they can do. But if they could see that the person who are producing these films are actually in positions, role model positions to do such things, it elevates their concept of who they can be and what they can do and who they are, the artists, the inventors, the entrepreneurs like Sheldon and people like that. We got to show people who we are and who we can be. And that's how we can do it.
Let me add on to that, Ray. It's very interesting. I'm a little bit into symbolism, and my last name is Ferguson.
I thought about that earlier.
And it's really interesting too that one of the books that I wrote, which is called Evolving the Human Race Game, a spiritual and soul-centered perspective, actually came out around the time of the Ferguson incident. So it was fascinating. And I'm working on a book right now, which is called Living in Synchronicity. So it's fascinating, to watch all of the synchronicity stuff happening. But the thing that I wanted to add is that indeed the visibility around the Black role models is just a story that's not told, and in different venues. If one were to ask, well, what was your experience like growing up in the segregated South? Because externally, I would be hearing narratives saying, well, you didn't have any Black male role models. And I would say back to them, well, yes, I did. There was never a dearth of Black male role models in the Black community in the segregated South. I always saw my principal was Black. Everybody in that community was Black, so I didn't have a dearth of Black male role models. But that wasn't talked about publicly. What I got was a narrative saying it was a deficiency narrative, that there was a deficiency around family life. And I literally grew up in an extended family. And my community was a family. And they treated, you couldn't get away with anything. There was mamas and daddies all over the place. So there was never a dearth of those kinds of models. So I just wanted to echo that theme.
So Riane, coming back to you, in terms of time and facilitation, where are we? Where do we need to go?
Well, we're actually in pretty good shape. We've got about 15 minutes or so to continue the conversation.
Okay.
So I want to bring up a very controversial topic. We need more controversy in our life, right? So a very good friend of mine who I call my favorite Republican. He's a very intelligent man. He's taught transformation workshops around the world. He wrote to me when I invited him to be part of the panel. He said, I looked up the meaning of endemic, as in endemic racism. And under any of the three main meanings, racism in America doesn't qualify. Racism is not endemic or even close to it. We're the least racist and most diverse country in the world. We made steady progress until Obama was elected, and that became the theme of the Democratic Party. So my question is, are we really caught up in a narrative that isn't true, as he says, or is he blind to what he can't see? And how do we deal with these radically different points of view so that we can move forward and make the world work for everyone? So there we have it. I'm going to put that out and see how you respond, because I think it's important to consider that point of view as well.
Well, I will assert that it is my belief that the word racist and racism has become so overused that it's kind of lost its true meaning. I don't deny without question the systemic racism of this country. But at the same time, I'm a firm believer in evolution. And I personally believe that human beings are still evolving. And I believe we're evolving in consciousness. And despite all of the challenges we see, as I look back on my short 60-year lifespan, and I think about growing up in the 60s and segregation and all of that, and to see where this country has come in just the past 60 years of our, we're 250,000 years old as a human species, I am filled with optimism about the trajectory that we're on. And so I think when I look at the situation with the former president and that whole conversation around race, I think it was actually what this country needed, because the country fell asleep thinking that, oh, we chose a Black president, so racism is over. And that allowed America to go, well, wait a minute, we need to rethink this thing because look at what's happening. So I think everything sort of happens for a reason. And I believe there's a divine intelligence that created and is still creating this amazing universe that we live in. And it knows what it's doing. And it's moving us forward. The question is, how many of us are willing to wake up, to really come to the full understanding that as a human species, we're all the same, we're all one. And again, I'm an optimist. That's the lens through which I see the world. I don't deny the challenges, but I also see the progress, and I'm optimistic about the future.
Michael, I love you. With the world needs optimists, but I'm a realist and a public policy expert. The record of the list of indictments against this country in terms of the progress is irrefutable. For every 5 steps we've taken, there's been 8 steps back, and those steps have been intentional. And so I don't know about the gentleman's definition of endemic and whatever, and you talk about extreme views. I'd rather deal with, and my mother wanted me to be an attorney, but the facts, let's just deal with the facts that there would not have been Brown versus Board would not have been necessary if it hadn't been for Plessy versus Ferguson. The Civil Rights Act in Title VII would not have been necessary had it not been for Jim Crow. We saw with the recent election, I'm here in Atlanta, we saw a voter turnout unprecedented. That voter turnout followed a previous election where the governor, as the former Secretary of State, took millions of people off the rolls. So we had to counteract that. As a result, we elected a Black senator, first time person, and then a white young Jewish person who had ran unsuccessfully in a previous race. And what did you see happen immediately from the Georgia State Legislature? I want to be optimistic too, but I'm not talking about the individual who has malice and intent in his or her heart, regardless of race. I'm talking about public policy. Georgia created a blueprint, which was quickly followed by Texas and Florida. Those are intentional, and they have intentional, and they will have measurable consequences that will need extraordinary human effort to overcome so that we don't go backwards. Why don't those same states, why aren't they telling their legislatures, telling their senators and congressional representatives to vote for the John Lewis Act or to vote for the George Floyd Act? Why wouldn't they put the same amount of energy behind federal legislation to help move the entire country instead of doing what they're doing? Michael, I love you, but until this country consistently moves forward in a singular direction to achieve one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, no, the jury is still out. And I'm holding my breath. I am holding my breath. My 2 sons, one of which is right now in Saudi Arabia, should not feel safer in Saudi Arabia than he did in South Carolina. Nope, this country is still a long way from what Martin said, the arc of justice, the arc bent toward justice, we still got a lot of pulling and pulling to get that arc to be where it needs to be. And that's all I got to say about it.
Well, you guys got to.
Don't need to be long-winded, but Michael, you knew I wasn't going to let you get away with that.
Actually, I'm with both of you because I think we got to be optimists, and I know we're all one, and I know we're divine, but we got to act. We got to pray as if it's up to God, but we got to act as if it's up to us. Now, so I actually come from the spiritual point of view, but I also know that racism is systemic, and it's intentional, and it's not an accident. And I just posted something in the chat box called Black Ghettos Are Not Accidents. And you guys got to look at it. It's a little film clip about that, about systemic racism. You know, I got a lot of white friends that I associate with. Almost my whole community and my whole professional community are white. I'm like one of the 2% or 3%. And people say, I'm not a racist. And I say, I'm not a racist is not enough. Because people think that racism is just treating a person badly. That's not what it is. It's so much more than that. It is systemic, like redlining in the communities, gerrymandering, making loans hard to get, building ghettos, building projects where you house people, and then they have to bring more of their families in, then ghettos happen, and then people think that Black people are slum people. Well, that housing project was set up by design. And that community was set up by design. And then people say, well, we don't want any of those slum people moving into our neighborhoods because they'll bring all that with them. Well, they didn't bring that with them because that's not who they are. That was created intentionally. And the truth of the matter is that we, seen for who we are an addition to society. We are the enrichment of society, not the denigration of society. And we've got to tackle these systemic issues that are by design for hundreds of years. And I don't know if any of you have read the Willie Lynch letter about how to enslave a people for several hundred years and enslave their psyche for hundreds of years. And that's what we're fighting. It's a lot. We could go on and on, so I don't want to take up all of our time, but we got to pray as if it's up to God, but we got to act as if it's up to us. We got to live from the divine, but we got to fix the systems that the divine live in.
Good. Thank you, Ray, for actually talking a lot about the systemic racism. It's really interesting to hear people talk about, the country not being racist. And while individuals may not be in that sphere, the whole country was actually founded on racist principles. And if you look at some of the history, and I do some of this in my, and this, forgive me my shameless plug here, but one of the books that I put together was called Transitions in Consciousness from an African American Perspective. And one of the appendices of that book, I was laying out a timeline of the African American experience up to the present day, and the different themes that were around different time periods. Now, if you looked at all of those themes, you would see the systemic racism at play and the pushes and pulls that were going on historically. Unfortunately, one of the historical things that that I think of Sheldon had mentioned it, was one that my namesake was on the wrong side of the thing, Plessy versus Ferguson. Ferguson was on the wrong side of history that time. But if you look at that history, though, and look at the themes that were going on throughout the entire history, you see that creative tension, that dynamic thing of pushes and pulls that's at a systemic level. And what I try to do is to identify all of the events, the public events in our consciousness that was at play during those periods of time, to say, look, this is what the systemic issues have been about. This is what systemic racism has been about. Yes, it can be overcome, but it has to be a conscious effort. So for me, I was very displeased, for example, when Senator Scott came to the podium and said, hear me, America's not a racist country. I went, oh my goodness. Most of us are familiar with discovering the Black referent, Cross's theory and so forth. And the first part of it has to do with the pre-encounter stage. And you can get stuck in all of these stages, but pre-encounter means using essentially like a Eurocentric perspective initially for how you look at yourself and so forth. And so when someone says, well, this country is not racist, when it's denying a whole lot of history. And to be more inclusive, you have to have an inclusive history to paint the entire picture. And so you have to look at, from my point of view, you have to look at not only the optimistic, positive things that have occurred, but also the things that have been holding the country back. Because if you don't acknowledge, you can't heal something when you don't acknowledge it. And that's the point I'm really trying to make. So first step of anything is acknowledging what is so, and then moving from there to trying to create some healing patterns and healing kinds of activities.
Well said. Thank you. And thank you all for your deep and powerful, heartful comments and input. Jim, I think it's time to return to you for a wrap up.
Well, gentlemen, thank you all. This has been profoundly moving today and profoundly inspirational. And I want to just make a few comments. First of all, Lion, if I may comment on your Republican friend's notion that racism is not endemic in America. At a minimum, he needs to read Isabel Wilkinson's book, Caste, and Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. What endemic means, by the way, endemic comes from the Greek word endemios, meaning native, that which is embedded in the demos, in the people. And there is no other conclusion to reach if one examines comprehensively the history of the United States, built as it was on stealing the indigenous land of the people who were already here and using slave labor from Africa to build that economy. One little factoid that is worth noting, that when the South seceded, the mayor of New York suggested that New York secede with the South, because the economy of New York and much of New England was so intertwined with the slave economy, he couldn't see a way out. That's endemic. And if you want to watch a documentary, I would recommend that you watch 13, which is just the history of the systematic oppression of Black males. And now in the prison system, the incarceration system, that's endemic. And within that context, I just want to say a few things. You know, Michael, your story, all of your stories, the resilience that you guys have is extraordinary. And it reminds me of something that Michelle Alexander says in her book, The New Jim Crow. She says, you know, one of the reasons why the Black male has been so resilient is because they came as warriors. Most of the people that were enslaved were warriors. They were defeated and captured, defending their villages or their land in Africa. And so that warrior energy has given them a strength to find the Black models in a world where all the media is doing everything it can to reinforce the archetype of servitude. And, you know, Cuff, your remark, I thought was, you know, that you are not the projections of others. You know, in that capacity, you know, Sheldon, when you told your story, that capacity, man, to know that you're in a racial incident and to keep your calm, to keep your silence with dignity, that is a warrior. So I just, mano, man, I just want to affirm the strength and fortitude of everything that you represent today, and the way you've sculpted masculinity under, I would say, extraordinary duress and still shine. I mean, that's remarkable. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I'd like to make two other very quick comments. One, Sheldon, you know, I was very struck by your initial point that it wasn't so much your personal experience that was of note to you, but the fact that we're in a situation of such collective denial. And that is a profound statement, not only about race, but it's a profound statement about climate change. It's a profound statement about the Republican Party and the well-educated Republican that Lion is mentioning. I don't know who he is, but that's a statement of denial. We're in a denial about the 2020 election. That is an extraordinary. So how we collectively deal with denial of realities that are staring us in the face and that are victimizing us every single day is perhaps the challenge of our lifetime. Because if somehow we could penetrate the denial around just race, we would have the key to opening up the denial on other pressing issues that are also, because they're not being acknowledged, are leading us off the cliff into self-destruction. You know, and that leads, I think, you know, to Ray. I think you made also a seminal point that, you know, it's not enough to say that you're colorblind. That no longer suffices. And I think that is a profound transitional reality that we all need to take in. I mean, at the beginning, we were very conscious about race. And that's why the white people subordinated the Black people and subordinated people of color systematically. And it's worth noting that in original slavery, it was not so. The racial inclusion into slavery was actually a modern invention coming out of Britain and the United States, basically with the slave trade.
It's also important to note, Jim, that that cultures have enslaved other people for millennia.
Yeah.
And even families have enslaved some of their own children to other adults or older brothers and sisters. That, servants and slaves have been throughout most cultures that we know of. Even tribal people will capture others and enslave them. So enslavement is almost as human as sexism. It's like it is a pandemic. It is endemic. It is built in. So we're battling not just the most recent forms of slavery, wage slavery, right? Getting people to do your work for you as if that frees you somehow. But karmically, it doesn't free you. It actually causes negative consequences.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think that the point is that the U.S. contribution to slavery was to identify it implacably and integrally around race.
Yeah.
And that endemic attitude towards slavery was what made it so pernicious and toxic. And I think that's something that is well researched and dealt with in Caste and in the new Jim Crow, which I've just recently read. So those realities are very fresh in my mind. But the point I'd like to kind of close with is Ray's point that I think in the kind of the 60s and 70s, there was a somewhat of an advance around not acknowledging the disparities around race and getting into this notion of colorblindness. But that is no longer sufficient. We need to be moving into a much more refined, sophisticated discussion around race, where the diversity of humanity, the diversity around race, the diversity around male and female, the diversity around being Asian in a melting pot culture is actually accentuated as part of our identity in a larger complexio where that diversity is actually celebrated for the contribution it can make to the larger whole. And I think that that's the beauty of what we're seeing here today. Lion and Michael, Sheldon, Ray, Cuff, is that next advance in the discussion. And, even though we're sort of out of time, I just want to flag some of these issues. And I want to just make, in conclusion, we're going to, Cuff and I are putting together a panel for May 25th. That's the anniversary of George Floyd's killing. And I'm wondering, Cuff, how we can maybe have all of you back, or some of you back who can make it, to really deepen this dialogue about something that's so fundamentally endemic. And then, as we think of this global men's summit, Michael, I didn't write down all the organizations and individuals that are doing such extraordinary work on Black masculinity, but really would like to include you and all of you in the discussions we're having as we shape, a global conversation around men in the 21st century, to make sure that we're including this issue of the racial aspects of masculinity. So Lion, I think we have a lot of very rich material coming out of this session that I just want to acknowledge that we've really just touched the tip of the iceberg, and we really want to go deeper, because I can't overstate the importance of this issue. And I want to return, as I conclude today, to the point that I started at the beginning. In some very deep and almost mysterious way of all the issues that it could have come up for the world through the pandemic, it's been the issue of race. Through the iconic death of George Floyd, that somehow has gripped the American psyche and the world. And there's consternation around it. And somehow I intuitively feel that if we can, really crack this koan, that a energy will be released into the global psyche that will allow us to deal with other issues that are also besetting the world, but somehow through the pandemic weren't so explosively brought to our collective attention. And at the heart of this is the experience of the Black man. And I don't know how it all fits together, but as a historian and as a philosopher, I can just feel that there's a complexio in these aspects that require much more and much deeper attention. And you guys have really dimensionalized this conversation. So I'm just profoundly grateful and want to take the conversation further if that's of collective interest, and we'll be in touch with you around that.
Jim, I just wanted to add one little thing. Is
Sure.
On the 25th, I'm hoping that we can get into talking about what I'm calling like the dark unknown archetype. And which might shed a little bit of light on the coalescing of this energy and how that might be looked at to help with the unfolding and evolutionary process that we're seeking right now. So
Brilliant.
hoping that we can do that.
Brilliant. It's rich stuff, my
Great.
friends. This is very rich stuff, and we're very, very grateful. Then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to have Eve Ensler with us. Eve Ensler, you may know, is the woman who wrote the Vagina Monologues about her experience of sexual molestation and a relationship with her father and patriarchy. And it's been the most translated modern play of our time. And has had a global effect of opening up that conversation. And she's going to be in dialogue with Andrew Harvey, a contemporary scholar and mystic around what they're calling the revolution of the mother. So Eve Ensler is going to be in this discussion. And then we're going to be putting together a dialogue for a course that we're doing this summer on the interface of gender and sexuality with ethnicity and race, because that's also a very deep complexio. The suppression of race and the suppression of women have produced an extraordinary amalgamation at the intersectionality of gender and sexuality, ethnicity and race, that Andrew and Eve and others are going to be discussing, and would love to have you gentlemen involved in those dialogues to the degree to which you're of interest, because it's our mission at Humanity Rising and at Ubiquity University to get at some of these deeper issues.
Yes, a beautiful dialogue. I saw the play, and actually my social media person is producing that play again. He's doing that play again in a few months. So they're all rehearsing for it now. It's a beautiful play. I think all of you need to tune into the dialogues. I also just posted something in there called a movie, a video about having critical conversations around race, around these issues that Jim so eloquently laid out for us. I just posted it, so maybe some of you will just grab it. It's a little trailer, and you'll see it there.
And I'd like to thank each of our panelists so much for the rich conversation. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Cuff. Thank you, Shelton. Thank you, Ray. It's been really deep and touching for me. And also, Jim, you're going to mention the Zoom conversation that people can join to go further.
Yeah, if you want to go to our after session chat, the link is in the chat box, and you're all welcome to that. So we'll say goodbye for now.
Good. I also, Jim, sorry, I just want to mention that in the chat box down at the bottom, there's 3 dots. And if you want to save all these resources, you can click the 3 dots and say save chat. And that will save it to a text file on your computer, and you'll have all the resources in front of you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again here tomorrow, same time, same station on Humanity Rising.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Thank you, Ryan.
Being with you all.
Great session.